In today's video, I have to survive 100 days in the Arctic. I have 3 objectives. First, create a stage 3 log cabin. Second, defeat Mace the Yeti, the king of the mountains. And third, eliminate Rusty, the leader of the North Pole. Can I survive in these freezing conditions? Stay tuned to find out. Do you want to fight the custom bosses you see in our videos? Consider subscribing to our Patreon. For only $5 a month, you'll have access to our exclusive maps, private SMP server, which features our custom bosses, and much more. Link is in the description.
Whoa, Mount Everest is a lot bigger in person.
It definitely is. All of our training has led us to this moment.
Let's get to it.
Do you hear that?
Avalanche, run!
Somehow I survived. I can't see anything. So on day 1 after surviving an avalanche, I dug myself out of the snow, and I was immediately greeted by a stray. So I ran away, then I fought a zombie under a tree, and afterwards took out that stray from before, and started getting myself some wood and tools. After a pretty rough start, I crossed a frozen river to get some wood and look for some food. Luckily, I ended up finding some sheep in the forest. With the sun almost setting already, I started looking for a cave to take shelter in. After a while, I finally found a cave, mined some coal, smelted up my food, and on day 2, I started looking for a new spot to take shelter. While exploring, I ended up finding some weasels in an ice spike biome. They ran away when I got too close though. I also ran into a herd of goats. I needed food, but these guys are pretty difficult to catch. So I settled for only catching one. So for day 3, I started gathering more food, got a bunch of wood, and started looking for an ideal place to set up shelter. While searching, I picked up some seeds, smelted up my food, and on day 4, I finally found myself another cave. This one in a much better spot, so I started to set up shelter here. I then renovated the cave for the rest of day 5, and from day 6 through 8, I decided to explore the cave and go mining, and get a bunch of iron, coal, and lapis. That mining trip went over pretty smooth. On day 9, I returned back to base and noticed it was snowing outside, then made myself a full set of iron armor, tools, and a fishing rod. So on day 10, I decided to go ice fishing. But while I was fishing, I noticed there was someone walking up to the lake who also was wanting to ice fish. Was that painful? I started to chase him immediately, and noticed he was taking me down some strange path. I decided on stopping to chase him because I was really low on food. So I returned back to the lake and started getting some salmon. I captured one in a bucket too. So I built this guy a little pool in my cave. After getting a bunch more salmon from the lake and smelting it up, for the next couple of days, I started searching for the guy that I saw at the lake. And while following the janky looking path, I crossed over a frozen pond and fell into a polar bear cave. They all started attacking me to try and protect their cubs, so I had to defend myself. So I ran around the cave taking out the polar bears one by one, and after taking out all the polar bears, I felt pretty bad afterwards. So I gave the cubs some leftover fish and started heading back to base. And while heading home, I ended up running into a small herd of mammoths. I decided to leave those guys alone. They looked like they could definitely mess me up. So I returned back to the cave, made myself a shield, and started working on gathering materials for my stage 1 igloo. So I gathered a bunch of snow, turning that into snow blocks, and then I turned the snow blocks into packed snow. I then crafted a campfire, and by surrounding a campfire with packed snow, I had myself a level 1 igloo. I then decided I wanted to move out of the cave, picked up my stuff, and started to search for a new spot for my igloo. And while looking, I ended up running into a pack of mountain lions. So I turned around and ran for my life, and after a couple more days of searching, I ended up finding an ideal spot to place down my igloo. It was surrounded by mountains, and there was a lake right next to it. I knew this spot would be perfect. So I threw it down and watched as my igloo built itself. The igloo had just about everything I needed inside. It had chests, campfire, bed, and furnaces. So on day 25, I started working on my source of food by gathering salmon. And after I got a bunch, I decided to go exploring. And while exploring, I ended up running to a killer bunny. I took it out. I didn't think much of it, but then when I looked to my left, there were at least 10 more killer bunnies. What the heck was going on? These little things were vicious. After killing a bunch more, I started getting attacked from behind and was on 2 hearts. I had to run away immediately. So after getting away from the killer bunnies, I ended up finding a shelter on the lake. I quickly ran over to inspect it, checked the chest, and there was nothing in them. Whose base could this have been? I salvaged some glowstone from the base and borrowed some of the crops, and then slept in the shelter for the night. So I continued my journey for the next couple of days and saw what looked like a volcano in the distance. It was covered in netherrack, so I started to climb to the top, and once I reached the top, there were striders and blazes all around. So I started killing some of the blazes for blaze rods, but made sure to be really careful as I didn't want to fall in the lava. Night had already struck, so I started to gather gather as much soul sand and nether warts as I could, as they were all around the outer rim of the volcano. And for the rest of the night, I kept killing blazes and gathering more nether wart. And while traveling back to base, I ended up running into a herd of bison. I was starting to run low on food, so I started to attack one, but I immediately regretted my decision as I started to get attacked by the entire herd. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. I tried again, but they kept on swarming me, so I decided on just getting the heck out of there. I was getting pretty desperate for food and finally found some deer, so I tried attacking one, but these guys were extremely fast. I had no idea how I was gonna catch one of these things. I thought I was gonna starve to death, but I managed to sneak up on one and take it out. And with nothing but raw rabbit meat, I finally made it back to base. So I started by making a nether wart farm, and afterwards started to gather a bunch of salmon. I then decided I wanted to go mining, search for a cave, and on day 41 I had finally found one. So I mined a ton of iron and coal, saw what looked to be a message from God, mined a lot of gold as well, fought off some mobs, and then found my first vein of diamonds. So I continued mining, got a bunch of emeralds, got a bunch more diamonds, and then when I returned back to the surface, I ended up finding an igloo. I carefully entered the igloo and noticed it was like a full-fledged base. There wasn't much in the chests, but I borrowed the anvils and bookshelves, and when I exited, I ended up getting jumped by an Eskimo. This must have been the guy from before. He already had me on half HP though, so I decided to run away and use the river to escape. And I finally made it back to my base on day 45. So on day 46, I smelted up all of my ores, made a giant crafting table, and then by putting snowballs around a diamond pick, I made myself an ice pick. This was gonna allow me to get ice, so I could then start working on making my stage 2 ice hut. So I spent day 47 getting all the packed snow and ice I needed to craft a level 2 ice hut. I spent the next couple of days looking for a good spot to place it and ended up settling on one of the ice spike biomes and placed it on one of the frozen ponds. The ice hut was complete with a basement, a fireplace, and plenty of rooms for storage. I then spent the next few days moving all the stuff over from my igloo over to the brand new ice hut. I then decided I wanted to return back to the volcano as I was gonna need obsidian if I wanted to make an enchantment table. I also killed some extra blazes as I was definitely gonna need more blaze rods, mined enough obsidian for an enchantment table, and then returned home with all the materials. I crafted an enchantment table, set up some bookshelves, mined some sand, started brewing potions, the first batch being strength potions, and when I was gonna go fishing again, I looked up at the hill and saw the Eskimo coming down. I was slightly on guard, but it looked like he was here for a reason. He then started dropping me fish. Maybe he wanted to make a peace offering? So I dropped him some fish as well, and then he kept on gesturing at me like he wanted me to follow him. So after about a day of following him at a safe distance, we arrived at some mountain, and he punched me back, almost to say to stop. And that's when I heard... The Eskimo looked terrified. Whatever was on top of that hill, he clearly could not handle himself. So we ended up going our separate ways. I made it back to base and kept on brewing as many potions as I could. While brewing potions, I did a bunch of fishing so I could have plenty of food for my next mining trip. So I found myself a cave and my goal was to find as many diamonds as I could. I also made sure to mine a bunch of other ores, but eventually over time, I ended up finding plenty more veins of diamonds and returned back to base on day 67. I then crafted myself a full set of diamond armor, enchanted each piece with a protection, made an armor stand for my iron armor, crafted some golden apples, grabbed some potions, and started heading back to the mountain where the Eskimo took me. Whatever this thing was, it must have been massive. So I climbed up the hill, I reached the peak, and there was a Yeti there to greet me. So I drank my strength and speed potions. I tried hitting him, but he immediately knocked me back. But luckily, I broke my fall with some water. I tried going in for another hit, but he knocked me back again, and then he threw a gigantic snowball at me. What the heck? I started landing a few hits on him and used my shield to block some of his attacks. I then ate a golden apple to regenerate some of my health, but he immediately knocked me into the air, instantly getting rid of my extra hearts. I then landed a few extra hits, getting him down to about half HP. Every time he knocked me back, I would break my fall with my water bucket, or at least try to sometimes. He then threw another snowball, which missed, and knocked me back, which brought me down to 2.5 hearts. So I popped my last golden apple, got knocked away again, kited away a little bit to eat some food, and went in to finish him off. I needed to use my shield as much as possible as I was out of golden apples. I broke my fall one more time, so I went in for the final few hits and had defeated Mace the Yeti. The Yeti had dropped 9 Yeti hide, so I started heading back to base and made it home on day 69. And by putting my diamond armor in a crafting table next to the Yeti hide, I was able to make a full set of Yeti armor. So I enchanted all of it and crafted myself a Yeti blade, completing my full set. I then farmed some nether wart and did some fishing for some more food. For the next 2 days, I found and explored a mine shaft, found a minecart with some melon seeds, mined some gold, and found a zombie spawner, which had diamond horse armor and a golden apple in the chest. So I returned home on day 73, planted my melon seeds, and started to work on getting the materials for my stage 3 log cabin. I was gonna need a lot of wood, so I spent the next couple of days mining as much as I could. By day 74, we had plenty of wood, and with iron ingots, I crafted a bunch of reinforced wood, so I could then craft myself a level 3 log cabin. So I spent the next couple of days looking for an ideal spot for my log cabin, and found a good spot in a frozen lake. I then threw down the log cabin and watched as it built itself. This was definitely the perfect base to survive in the Arctic with. It had plenty of storage, brewing stands, and a fireplace. All that was left to do was to go back to our base and transfer all of our stuff from our old base to our new one. And after a few days, just about everything was transferred to our log cabin. And afterwards, I decided to go exploring. I ended up finding some sheep and brought them back to my base. I then gathered some more melons and decided to go exploring for the next couple of days, finding a weird looking skeleton. There wasn't much here, so I decided to go back to base and start working on one of my projects. With the sheep I just got, I wanted to make a little barn for them. So for the next few days, I worked on making a barn for the sheep right next door to my log cabin. I didn't want my sheep to just be left out in the cold. And once I had finished the interior of the barn was fully complete. And honestly, I think it turned out pretty well. And on day 89, I set out to try and look for Painful. Hopefully he had survived the avalanche and is out there somewhere. And while passing by that skeleton again, it looked like the eye of the skeleton had changed. When I looked at the eye, I had heard a gurgle and ran straight into a giant walrus. I drank both of my potions and started getting magma cubes thrown at me. What the heck? It was indigestion. Not gonna lie, that's kind of disgusting. But either way, I had to be careful. So I went in, but he knocked me away. And when trying to go in again, he started hurling a ton more magma cubes at me. It was gonna be pretty difficult to get close to this guy. So I started to clear the way and take out some of the magma cubes, but he just kept on hurling more at me. I finally found an opening and landed a hit, and he knocked me into the air, dealing a ton of damage. So I had to throw down a health potion and eat some food. Every single time I seemed to get close, he would just knock me away again. So I popped a golden apple, took out some more magma cubes, and landed a bunch more hits onto him when I got closer. Also, something I didn't notice till just now was that there was a penguin riding on top of him. Was he commanding the walrus to attack me? I went in and did a ton more damage, but I also got knocked away and brought down to 3 hearts. I managed to throw down a health potion, and I noticed that the walrus was extremely low, so I went in and landed the final hit. I also noticed something had dropped on the ground. I picked it up, and it was something called Penguin's Bane. It was a sword that did 12 attack damage and seemed to have come from the penguin. So with the Penguin's Bane, I started one-shotting every single magma cube, and then I returned back to my log cabin and slept in my master bedroom. After that much-needed rest, I fished for the rest of the day on day 94, preparing to make my return to Mount Everest. And for the next 3 days, I searched for Mount Everest, and had finally reached the bottom on day 99. I lost to this mountain once, I was not gonna lose to it again. I was gonna reach the top no matter what. That wasn't until I heard the same noise, which I knew was an avalanche, so I got out of the way quickly and watched as the avalanche tumbled by. Now that was a close call. If I didn't get out of the way in time, that would have been the end of me. I was gonna have to be even more cautious as I climbed the mountain now. So I continued climbing, and at the dawn of day 100, I had finally reached the top.
Painful? I'm glad you survived. Yeah, that avalanche came out of nowhere. Now that we both made it to the peak, let's go home while we're still alive.
If you made it this far, make sure to watch Painful's video. We each had different objectives, which made our videos a lot different. Thanks so much for watching, and have a good one.